Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. I hope you were able to watch the program last week. We got into a little bit about controlling society through the money system, the hows and the whens, and how we lost control of our money system and what some of the plans were. And we also got into quite a bit of quotes from different eras within our history, some prior to the Federal Reserve Act, some post, and some during. And I want to continue along with that theme. But I want to just review one thing from last week. And what we got into, besides all the other information we got into, was we did some research on, okay, what was the primary cause of the American Revolution? What made the people of England desire to risk everything, life and limb and property, to separate themselves from England? And basically, we took two quotes. One was from Ben Franklin, the American side, and the other was from a study, if you would, that Parliament of England did in 1813, actually in 1803, it was printed in 1813. And what they basically did was, let's look at, what they basically did as in the English side is they said to themselves, okay, we had a major loss here. You know, what are some of the mistakes that we made? Number one, not only to lose the North American continent as a possession, but number two, how did it get so bad that the English colonists actually wanted to separate themselves from England? So I think it's interesting that we look at this, and I think you're going to be a little startled that, wow, this just wasn't about what I was told. So anyway, let's read Ben Franklin's quote. And again, folks, this is Ben Franklin quoting on what made the American colonists want to separate and sever themselves, their relations from England. The refusal of King George to allow the colonies to operate an honest money system, which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of the money manipulators, was the primary cause of the revolution. Okay, that's the American side. What made the American people so infuriated that they decided to do this was the fact that, and by the way, folks, King George was being controlled at that point also. As we've gotten to the show many a times, we merely elect executives to an insolvent corporation at this time. But at that time, the Bank of England was just, through the Rothschild banking house, was just starting to gain control of the issuance and the money system of England. So what, again, the Bank of England being a private corporation, so what they wound up doing was they said to the American people that we are not, two things. Number one, we're not going to allow foreign gold and silver into the continent United States. And the reason why they did that was because, folks, they didn't want to have an intrinsic valued currency. They didn't want to have a currency backed by gold and silver. They wanted to have a fiat money legal tender medium of exchange. So in other words, they really didn't want money at all, because the gold and silver does multiple things. One, how would the private Bank of England gain control of the money system of the North American continent if the colonists had an independent, intrinsic valued currency? They couldn't. Number two, how would they levy taxes and put the country into debt? See, because if you have a gold standard, folks, you can't just print fiat money. You have to acquire more gold to be able to print the more money, and then there's not this inflation period and deflation period, because there is a steady monetary value of the intrinsic value, which at this point by the Constitution was gold and silver. So when they say, how all of a sudden did we get into this welfare state where we're constantly printing this fiat money and going into interest debt to a private bank because they gave us permission to print it in the first place? Okay, so the Bank of England, through the Rothschilds, they didn't want this. They wanted to have the control, and they also wanted to be able to levy taxes and interest upon the people. This is a for-profit corporation. And the other thing it does, folks, and when I say control, I'm talking about not just control the issuance of the currency, but I'm speaking of control of society as a whole. And this is what we're going to get into today on this program. Why and how, what are the mechanisms that by controlling a currency, how do we control society as a whole? How is it that they control the booms and the busts? How is it that they control through bribes and payoffs, and they do, the federal entities of government at the federal level? So Franklin is telling you on the American side here that the reason for the people, the English people that want to become American sovereigns was because of the issuance of the currency. Now, let's see what this study, which is called The Parliamentary History of England from the Earliest Period to the year of 1803, again, printed in 1813. And this is an examination by the British Parliament, and this is in their own writing, folks. This is exactly what they reported. To a concurrence of causes, the restraints lately laid upon their trade being the American colonies, by which the bringing of foreign gold and silver into the colonies was prevented, though the prohibition of making paper money among themselves, and then the demanding of new taxes and of new and heavy taxes by stamps, taking away at the same time trials by juries and refusing to receive and hear their humble petitions. So what created this on the English side? Again, the prevention of gold and silver and the prohibition of them controlling the issuance of their own paper money. Okay? So again, why would England do that? Because they were being controlled by the Bank of England, who needed and wanted and desired control of the money system in these United States. The taking away at the same time of trials by juries and refusing to receive and hear their humble petitions. Folks, the colonists for about 12 years petitioned the King of England. Ben Franklin went many times, and so did others. All right? And he had deaf ears. He didn't want to hear it. Of course, folks, he had deaf ears with a gun being held at the back of his head by the Bank of England. Okay? This is the reason why he had deaf ears. And again, the taking away of trial by jury. Now, the trial by jury, we won't get into too much here at this program because we're going to concentrate on controlling a society through the money system. But the trial by jury, folks, this is the power and the responsibilities that we have as a people to correct the usurpations and the corruption of today. But when you, and again, I don't want to get too much, but when you go on a jury panel, what do they tell you? The judge will tell you, you don't need not to interpret the law, I will do that for you. Well, how do you know what you're voting on? When you read the jury system that was left to us through common law, we can not only give votes of guilty or not guilty, but we can also question the intent of the law and the law itself. If you think that a person has the right to do something, say in their household, and the government says they don't, and you're on a jury, and you're a juror, you have the right to rebuke that law if you feel that that law is unconstitutional. That by the Fourth Amendment, we are supposed to be safe and secure in our papers and effects and so forth. This has all been taken away from you through the power of the education process, or lack of, I should say. So anyway, folks, back to the American and the English side here. What was the reasoning for the English people to sever themselves from Mother England and become American colonists? On both sides of the equation, we see it was the control and issuance of the money system. Okay? So when you hear about all these other facades, understand that according to Ben Franklin and others on the American side, and according to a parliamentary study of 1813, that it was the control of the money system. Now, interesting enough, 1813, because we had the War of 1812. And I will tell you, you never hear about the War of 1812, but I will tell you, folks, the War of 1812 was sort of a carryover, if you would, of the Revolutionary War. And the reason why I say that, it was about the control, the issuance of the currency again. And then, of course, we get into Andrew Jackson and so forth, where he basically went on to be the president of the United States, and he killed the bank, which actually is on his gravestone. He actually wrote that. His epitaph was that, "I killed the bank." That's on his gravestone. He was very proud of what he did, and he brought in a period of prosperity to the American people, and without putting them into a monster debt. So we get back into here understanding that we can control society through the issuance of the currency. And how can we do that? Of course, we can do that through economic swings. You know, we're going to have prosperity here, or we're going to get everybody into debt here and then pull back the money supply so they don't have the means to pay the monthly nuts that we fabricate and put them people into. Or we can control them by inflationary periods and deflationary periods. We can control them. And in many ways, when you control through law. You know, what was it Baron Rothschild said? "Give me control of a nation's currency. I care not who makes its laws." Why? Because he understood the whole mechanisms of the effect of money on a society. And he also very much, Ben Franklin and even the colonists, the average man in America during that period, during the founding era, folks, was very well educated onto the history of money. Very well educated. What was it Henry Ford said? It is well the American people do not understand their money system, for if they did, I fear there would be revolution by morning. Henry Ford said that. That's exactly what he's talking about. Okay? The American people today are completely saturated in debt, both personally and through the government, through the corporation we know as the government. And the money system is losing value every single day. And this is one of the mechanisms of controlling society. You know, Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Treasury Secretary, and basically the father of Reaganomics, in February 2009, made a very blunt statement. And then here's a man who understands what's going on with the money system in this country. And he said very bluntly, America is bankrupt. America is bankrupt. He was not just talking about the insolvent corporation you know as the U.S. government. That corporation went insolvent to another corporation on March 9th, 1933, which we have read verbatim to you on other shows. What he's talking about is America. He's talking about the people of our nation. We're bankrupt. Our money system, or lack of, is an instrument of debt to a private bank. We bond our children to a private bank called the Bank of International Settlements. For every so-called dollar, which we know they're not dollars, you have in your pocket, there is an interest bond due on that. So if we print more of these instruments of debt to pay off the original interest, what takes place? You're into more debt for interest due. And the process goes on and goes on and goes on until you find yourself in a place of perpetual debt. And this is where we are today. So Paul Craig Roberts is a former Secretary of Treasury, is speaking of America as a whole. He is not speaking of the U.S. corporation. Do you remember in one show we took out our Black's Law Dictionary and we read to you verbatim, what is the United States? And we came to the understanding that the United States has three definitions. One is the union of the states that makes up the United States. The other is the geographical area of the United States. And the other, if you watched that show and/or last week, we spoke of this, is the corporation. Through the Organic Act of 1871, your United States government was formed as a for-profit corporation. And in the next couple of weeks, folks, when we get into the birth certificate and some other things, we are going to demonstrate to you through a company called Dun & Bradstreet, which correlates and rates all private for-profit corporations. We are going to show and demonstrate to you that the United States government is listed on Dun & Bradstreet as a for-profit corporation. And we're going to show you entities of that corporation are listed as such. For instance, the State Department of the United States is listed as a separate for-profit corporation. Folks, this is where we are. Now, you may say, oh, this just can't be. The United States government's a corporation. Folks, it has been since 1871. Reconstructionist Act. Again, what do you think they reconstructed? They reconstructed our form of government. And we got into that before. We got into the different inferior and superior positions to the people and to the states and to the federal government. We got into that before, and I don't want to be redundant, but it all ties in. It's all weaved together. It's one big spider web of deception. And when you touch one part of that web, the whole thing is interconnected. And when you understand that web, you really understand the grasp that we are in, as Louis T. McFadden said, the clutches of the international money changers. So we're under an economic system today of deception, of debt, but where was the roadmap of this system really put together? 1908 through 1912, the different meetings that went on, the Aldrich Bill out of Senator Aldrich out of Rhode Island, incredibly corrupt. He was a front man for a lot of the major international banking houses, particularly the Rothschilds. And then we also have a man by the name of John Maynard Keynes, and that's Keynes. And he wrote a very interesting book, which they were a little upset he wrote this, but it's called The Economic Consequence of Peace. And the quote I'm going to give you is from page 235, and I really invite you to study this book. You are going to see the similarities of today, the hows and the not just the hows, but the whys. Okay, here's how they mechanically did this process, but here's why. Here's the results they were looking for, okay? And I think I want to read this statement to you verbatim, and then I want to break the statement down. Let's try to get an understanding of what Mr. Keynes is speaking of. Now, folks, you may have heard of Keynesian economics, okay? I have heard a lot of people on TV. Ron Paul has spoken at very much in light about Keynesian economics. Evelyn Rothschild. There are many, many, many people with Carol Quigley who have spoken of and acknowledged that we are following Keynesian economics. So let's take this quote from John Maynard Keynes, his book, Economic Consequence of Peace, and let's break it down and see exactly, number one, what their intent was. Are they looking to benefit the middle class of this country and have a prosperous, sovereign, independent nation? Or are they looking to control the mechanisms of currency, hence the mechanisms and attitudes of society and all the attributes to it? And I'm talking about the education system, the court, the justice system, the military, the government itself, okay? And not only that, but the economic policies of the government, which unfortunately controls the mechanisms of our economy. Actually, I should correct myself. The government doesn't control it. The government gets marching orders from the bankers, and then through their marching orders, they control it. So don't think for one moment that your government is in control of the money system of this country. They're not. That changed in 1913, Federal Reserve Act. We've read that verbatim to you before also. Your money system is controlled by a private foreign bank, and the policies of this foreign corporate banking institution are guided by what I'm about to read to you. John Maynard Keynes, page 235, Economic Consequence of Peace. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens. There is no suppler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society than to debauch its currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and it does so in a manner in which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. That's an incredible statement. But let's break the statement down. By a continuing process of inflation. Now, what is inflation? Because we hear this term quite a bit. You know, inflation, deflation, deflation. Do you remember Thomas Jefferson's famous quote? If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issuance of their currency by a process of inflation and then deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them, through the process, the American people will wake up homeless in the continent their forefathers conquered. Remember that quote? We've read it here quite a few times. So what is this continuing process of inflation? Inflation is this, folks, and I think Ron Paul, Louis T. McFadden, many, many others have summed it up quite well. It's a hidden tax. Here's what the mechanics of it is. And I'm going to start with an example. In 1964, my mother bought a house for $14,000. And this house, 3 years ago, the inflation part, was worth about $300,000. Now, no adding on with the house. The footprint was still the same. The square footage was the same. Just, building maintenance, which is all part of maintaining a building. That was it. So what changed that we went from $14,000 in 1964 to $300,000, say, 3 years ago? Did the house change? No. I just described to you. The footprint was the same. The square footage was the same. The only thing that took place was, painting and maintenance. That's all part of having a building. So what's the other part of this equation? The other part of the equation is the medium of exchange. In other words, the unit that is purchasing this entity. Are you with me? I hope so. So we went from $14,000 to $300,000. Of course, we know there aren't dollars, but we're going to use that term because that's what it's recognized as. So what changed? If the house didn't change, what had to change? It was the value of the medium of exchange being the dollar. All right? So as they printed more dollars, more of these worthless fiat based on nothing, no intrinsic value to it, currency, it became less and less value because there was more of it with nothing backing it. Are you with me? So this is what the inflation is, the devaluation of the value of that medium of exchange, which in this case is the dollar. The house didn't change, the dollar changed. And because we went off the gold standard and there was nothing locking the bankers and or the government down to only printing what was available in intrinsic value, it became less and less valuable because they kept printing more. Can you say Argentina in the 90s? Can you say the Weimar Republic in the 1920s? The house didn't change, the money did, or lack of, I should say. The medium of exchange changed. So, by a continuing process of inflation, so does this just happen by happen chance? No, this is a continuing process. And what this does is it not only devalues the purchasing power of that instrument, which at this point is a facade called the dollar, but it also rises prices up. And it also puts what? The people into debt because they have to print more of this worthless fiat money. So they have to earn more of the money to buy the same house. Folks, in 1964, you maybe have been able to come up with the $14,000 to pay this house upright. How many of you, even now, can write a check for $300,000? Not many. Not many. So you have to understand that this is a continuing process. This is a controlled process by controlling the issuance of the currency, and that's why the issuance of the currency was mandated a responsibility to the Congress, and that's why all the founding fathers, Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, and go on and go on and go on, even Hamilton, who was for a central bank, understood that the control of the issuance of the currency is as important and vital as having a fiat or intrinsic valued currency. They understood this. Because, as Baron Rothschild said again, give me control of a nation's currency, I care not who makes its laws. He's not just talking about controlling the value of it, he's talking about controlling the issuance of it. How much of it am I putting into society? What am I backing it up with? Am I backing it up with anything? If I'm not backing it up with anything, it's a debt, and who is liable to the debt? Do you remember we read from the Federal Reserve Banking Act of 1913, number 5, the fifth desire? What was it? How to, when it collapsed, transfer the liability of debt to the American taxpayer. You think they've done that? Absolutely they've done it. And they just keep printing it out. We got into last week about quantitative easing. Such a beautiful, soft words, huh? Quantitative easing. Lay down, have a nap. Don't worry about it. Quantitative easing, folks, number 3, and the number 4 is right around the corner, is putting your children into debt at $150 billion, that's with a B, every month. Every 30 days, this private foreign bank is laying a $150 billion tax on the American people. And why they're doing it is, besides all the other stuff, the reason why they're doing this, folks, is because Saudi Arabia is still buying our treasury bonds, although at a reduced rate because they have to because of the OPEC agreement. But China, in the last 2 months, has not even sent a representative to the Fed auction to purchase T-bonds. China was number 1. They were buying all of it. That's what's keeping the ship afloat. So what the Federal Reserve, what the one corporation is doing, is they are giving the other corporation, the insolvent corporation, which is the United States government, permission to print more fiat debt instrument money to purchase the treasury bonds to keep the whole system floating and to begin with. So the Federal Reserve purchases the bonds, they issue them and they purchase them. We have to, the American citizens have to pay a bond on the issuance of the bonds, and now we have to pay an interest when, now we have to pay when the bond comes due, we have to pay the reward out for the bond. And then, folks, through all this, we have to pay the private bank, as the Federal Reserve, an interest bond due on every note they gave us permission to print in the first place. Are you following me? It's unbelievable. So they issue, and then the private reserve, folks, makes the profit off the bond because they're the ones who's getting the bond itself. So the American people are stuck with the tax, they're stuck with the inflation, they're stuck with having to pay the bond when it matures, and they are stuck with the interest due to the private bank who's reaping the benefit of the bond in the first place. Do you think your elected representatives are looking out for you making this kind of deal? Think of it. And it's just like the OPEC deal that we spoke of last week, and I'll be real quick about it. We talked about the triangle. We formed OPEC. We shut down Prudhoe Bay in Alaska. Read Lindsey Williams' book, The Energy Non-Crisis. Please read that book. The Energy Non-Crisis by Lindsey Williams. Go on the internet, better yet, because I know most of you haven't read a book in years, and that's not insulting, it's just we're in the electronic age. So go on the internet and punch in Lindsey Williams, and if you go to YouTube, you can find his last speech. And you can find out what he's all about and how he had this information and how he was physically there in Alaska when we capped all these wells. Look what happened in North and South Dakota. What was it called? The Belkin Belt, where they found more oil reserves in North and South Dakota. This was just last year, folks. They found more oil reserves in North and South Dakota than has all been discovered in Saudi Arabia. What did they do with that? Wow, our gas prices should be down at 20 cents a gallon, right? No, what did they do? Within 72 hours, the United States government declared that a preserve for environmental reasons, and you were not allowed to drill. Never mind all the wells we have capped up in Alaska. Think of that. And the reason why that is because of the triangle we spoke of last week. We formed OPEC. We told Saudi Arabia, we're going to protect you. We're going to make you billionaires. And what you're going to do is you're going to take a percentage of your earnings from us having to buy our oil from you. You're going to use the American dollar as the medium of exchange. And then you're going to take a percentage of your earnings and you are going to purchase our treasury bonds to keep this whole facade going along. So the American people are stuck in this triangle of protecting / conquering the Middle East, militarization, They're stuck with the high prices of having to transport the oil over here and all that, so that they're paying for the high price at the pump. And then they're stuck with actually with the currency. We went through that whole thing before, and I'm being a little redundant here. But this triangle that we are stuck in, and we're paying at all three corners of it. And it's the same thing with talking about this process of inflation. It's about control. It's a mechanism of control, okay? So with this continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate. We all know what the word confiscate means. To gather, to collect, secretly and unobserved. Are they doing this out in the open? Is this something that's on the front page of your local newspaper? Is it on CNN, Fox, and the rest of them? No. Because the American people do not understand their money system, or lack of, they do not understand the mechanics of their money system, or lack of. So they really don't understand what inflation is. They don't understand that inflation is a controlled mechanism. It's a process, not of happen chance, but it's controlled. And they don't understand that it's controlled by a foreign entity, a private for-profit corporation. They don't understand that the reason why they want us off the gold standards was so they could implement this process to begin with. Because if you had a barometer that couldn't be adjusted, and you know it as, we're going to raise the ceiling debt. We're going to raise the ceiling debt. Folks, I have been hearing them words since I was a child. Since I was a child, we're going to raise the ceiling debt. If they had a gold standard, it locked them into that. They wouldn't be able to do that. We wouldn't have this bludgeoning government that we have. The federal government would be back where it was supposed to be. Now, I know people find this hard to believe, but folks, before the Civil War, the average sovereign citizen in the States did not care who the federal president was. Because I'm going to tell you why. The federal president only had power with territories, enclaves, and districts, as in the District of Columbia, or better known to me as the District of Criminals. That's the only place they had power. The states were not supposed to be involved. I apologize. The federal government was not supposed to be involved in the states. They had no power to. They had no authority to. But what took place, again, and we've gotten into this before, was the Reconstructionist Acts. And that inferior-superior position was flip-flopped. So by a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved. So what does that tell you right there? Secretly and unobserved. They're doing it, and they're trying to do this without you having knowledge of it. They are keeping you ignorant not only of the money system, but they're keeping you ignorant of the process that's taking place and has been since 1913. Why are you not hearing about this in the news? Why are you not being taught this in the public fool system? Why? Why? Because these very same entities, these bankers, control them entities. They control them. Give me control of a nation's currency. I care not who makes its laws. Baron Rothschild, again, is he talking about just the money system? He's talking about society as a whole. America is bankrupt. Craig Roberts, he's talking about America as a whole. As a whole. We are not only bankrupt into debt, we're bankrupt of knowledge. We're so ignorant to the control mechanisms that control our daily lives, and we are completely ignorant of the people who are behind the scenes. It amazes me. It really does. I'm every day, folks, I am amazed at what is going on in front of me, and the average American person is completely ignorant of the who's, the what's, and the whys. And the thing that really is appalling to me is a lot of you don't even care. And the other thing that's appalling to me is that a lot of you think, oh, there's nothing we can do. You know that old saying, death in Texas is inevitable, you can't fight City Hall. We've all heard them slogans before. Folks, that's conditioning for you. Them slogans are conditioning for you. Income tax. Oh, you don't want to pay your fair share. Have you ever heard that before? We've all heard that one, right? You don't want to pay your fair share. Folks, we read the Grace Commission to you verbatim here on a previous show, and we read it to you verbatim where the Grace Commission came to the conclusion that not 1 cent of your income tax money goes to the operations of what the people expect of the operations of the American government. Where does it go? Federal Reserve banking system to the IMF, International Monetary Fund. I invite you to read the book by John Perkins, a native of the state of New Hampshire, called The Economic Hitman. Read that book. And he lays it flat out. He lays it right out. The process, he gives you historical data, and he gives you events that he was part of at the ground level to conquer and usurp powers and resources and control of foreign countries. You wonder why the world hates us, besides the fact that we've bombed more countries since World War II than all the other countries combined in this world? It's not just that, folks. See, you know it as foreign aid. Again, Orwellian words. You think we're giving these people foreign aid. And you don't mind doing it because Americans are a very benevolent people and historically have been. So you really think we're helping these people? Folks, all we're doing is they're taking your labors and they are taking it and conquering economically, socially, and through authoritative powers and the resources of these other countries. And this is why they hate us. This is why they hate us. And how we're funding this is through your labors, through the income tax, which, by the way, is voluntary. And I promised myself that this year we are going to do a show on the income tax, and I'm going to bring in my IRS field guide and my IRS code book, and we're going to read it to you verbatim that the income tax for private citizens is voluntary. But of course, it's enforced through what? Through the corporate courts, the commercial courts. It's incredible, folks. So they are doing this secretly and unobserved. And what are they doing? They are confiscating an important part of the wealth of their citizens. An important part of the wealth. Folks, we don't have any wealth. You think you own your land? You're wrong. Think you own your car? You're wrong. You think there's intrinsic value to your money system? You're absolutely wrong. We don't have any wealth, folks. We have debt. Federal Reserve note. What's a note? An acknowledgement of debt. You bond your children through ignorance. Certificate, right? What's the word certificate? We've done this too many times on this show. We've demonstrated to you that we bond our children. I, at one time on this show, had a copy of my bond from the Midwest Bank Note Company on a secured paper, demonstrating that I was bonded on November 12, 1958, and I was born, the flesh and blood was born on November 10th, 1958. So we do not have wealth. Have they confiscated an important part of our wealth secretly and unobserved? Absolutely. Absolutely they have. There is no wealth, folks. What you would consider wealth, there's none of it. Your money system is based on debt. You bond your children, and as Jefferson warned us, the American children will wake up homeless on the continent their forefathers conquered. My friends, you do not own your home. And if you think you do, go ahead and don't pay your extortion fee known as property taxes for 2 years, and you will see who owns your home. And this is why all of your houses and land are recorded to the corporation. This is why all of this information, your mortgage, French, death pledge, is public record. I can go to your town clerk's office or your city hall and I can find out the mortgage, the amount, the term, and the payment you're making. Well, you would think that'd be ludicrous. You would think, what, wait a minute, this is mine, this is private. It's not private, folks. The corporation owns your land, and that insolvent corporation put it up as collateral to the creditor. This is where we are as a country. So have they secretly and unobserved confiscated an important part of the wealth of their citizens? Not an important part of the wealth, all of the wealth. We own nothing. Now, I know that some of you who watch this show are smart enough to understand this and have gone out and bought some gold and silver. I understand this, and I know this is true. I know there are people who watch this program, and I'm very, very thankful for this, and we all are. The people in front of the camera and behind the camera, extremely thankful that you take time to watch this program. And I know that some of you are preparing. I know that some of you are out buying gold and silver, which, by the way, is a great investment because not only is it recognized and it's intrinsic, but it's growing in value every day. And why is that growing in value every day? Is the gold and silver coin in your hand changing every day? No. What is changing? The other part of that process of purchasing that gold and silver, the medium of exchange, is changing. The so-called dollar, which is a Federal Reserve note, is changing. And how is it changing? It's devaluing. So just like that house in 1964 compared to 2004, same thing. The house hasn't changed, the gold and silver hasn't changed, the medium of exchange, the dollar, is changing. And how is it changing? It's devaluing. Why? Because they're printing more and more and more and more of it. Putting you more and more in deeper debt. Confiscating the wealth of their citizens. Their citizens. Look at the position of where we are. It's their citizens. So how is the government, how is John Maynard Keynes looking at this? He's looking at this as you're the possession of the government. Their citizens. Not the citizens, which would demonstrate no possession at all. Their citizens. You understand what I'm saying here? This is the mindset of these people, as so many have called the invisible government. Woodrow Wilson, we read it last week, verbatim. The invincible money powers, the invincible government, the money changers. Folks, this is who's controlling this. This is the mechanism, this is the roadmap they're using to do this to us. They're citizens. Who's in possession of who? Okay? A continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. And they've confiscated all of it. Besides you who are smart enough and are a student of history enough and are a student of what's going on today to understand this, besides that gold and silver, talk broadly about the average American. What wealth do they have? Don't tell me their money system, it's based on debt. Don't tell me they own their home, their land, their cars. They don't. So have they done this? They've done it quite well, haven't they? Okay. There is no suppler and no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society than to debauch its currency. So is this just about controlling the money? No, this is about controlling society. And how do they do that? Well, let's think. They have controlled our society through the news, or lack of. They have controlled our society through the public fool system. They have controlled our society through a foreign guild taking over our court system that you know is the bar, British Accreditation Registry. We've gotten to this before. And this is the reason why attorneys are called esquires. It's a title of nobility. This is the reason why. And how have they acquired all this power? Secretly and unobserved? Through control of the issuance of the currency. Understand this. And there is no suppler and no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society. So they are not only looking to control the money system, folks, they are managing, manipulating, controlling our society as a whole. And one of the mechanisms that they do this with, and we've spoken about this before, is the Hegelian dialectic. Problem, reaction, solution. And what I'm speaking about is this. They create a crisis to get the reaction from the people as a whole that they desire. Problem, reaction. And then the solution is that you will welcome the authoritative move. Like, oh, we have to do something about drunk driving, so we're going to have roadblocks now. Unconstitutional, completely unlawful by the base of this country, roadblocks. We had 9/11, so now we're going to have sex with you at the airport, basically. We're going to have roadblocks. We're going to control all your communications. And don't tell me the government's not easing on your phone and your computer. Look up Echelon. We've gone over this on this show before. You know, folks, I think that's about the 10th time that I have said in a half-hour program that we've gone over this on this show before. If you're not watching this show on a regular basis, then you're probably ignorant of a lot of the facts that are controlling your life and you don't even know it. So try to tune in. Try to watch this show. Try to dispute the information we give to you so you'll go out and do your own research. And you will find the truth that we're presenting to you. Folks, we're not making this up. We are talking here verbatim in their own language, in their own writings, in their own documentation, from the congressional record, from the legislative pages. I mean, you can't make this up. Stephen King couldn't make this up, even though this is one heck of a horror story. So understand this. This is where we are. This is why it's so important that they operate in darkness. This is why it's so important that you're not aware of, as Henry Ford said, of the mechanisms and the mechanics of our money system. It's vital to them. I want to read a quote to you from the Rockefellers before this show is over, John David, and he's actually thanking the Washington, New York Post and the Times and all these newspapers. Thank you so much for attending our secret meetings and keeping it confidential, because we could not prepare the world through exposure of light. This is what they're talking about. This is why the AMA, Rockefeller Foundation, American Medical Association, folks, is not part of the government. It's a Rockefeller Foundation. The NEA, National Education Association, Control of Education. Same thing. They take these, as you know them, NGOs, non-government organizations, and they control the mechanisms of different entities of society through the control of the money system. This is how they do it. So they write this nice little fancy IRS code that gives them all the tax breaks in the world that they want, so they can operate without the burden of the taxes and the levies. And you, the producer of this country, particularly the middle class, you pay these outrageous taxes and levies. You have to answer to these alphabet agencies throughout the government. Folks, I'll be honest with you. If I was a business person, a big business person, the United States of America would be one of the last places on my list that I'd want to do business. It really would. I have such an abundance of government interference that it just doesn't make it worthwhile. And then I'm struggling to earn a currency or medium of exchange that every single day is devaluing. And not just here in the United States, folks. Most of the world no longer wants our dollars. Most of the world sees it for what it is. I know you don't, the average American person, but the average person out in the world. Do you remember last year, a friend of my brother's, whose wife was from Portugal, they were flying back and they were going to go do a little med thing, and they were flying back, and actually they went to Madrid. And if you remember the story, a taxi cab driver in Madrid would not take a $20 bill from my brother's friend to pay the cab fare, which is just unbelievable. I know you're probably laughing saying, oh, come on. Well, this is true. And folks, you want to take it another step to the unbelievable? My friend offered the cab driver another $20 bill just to take the original $20 bill to pay the cab fare, and the cabbie wouldn't take it. This is a cabbie in Madrid. He knows more about the money system and what's going on with the so-called dollar than you do. And you're the one responsible for all its liabilities. It's amazing. It's amazing. So when we talk about John Maynard Keynes, and this is the roadmap and this is just a small portion, folks. This is just one statement out of this book. You need to read this. You're going to be amazed. No suppler, no surer means of overturning the basis of a society. Control of a society. Complete control of a society. Okay? than to debauch its currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction. Is it on the side of prosperity? We're going to have a prosperous, blooming, healthy, educated middle class, which was always the foundation of this country? No. What have they done with the basis of society? We have a dumbed down, ignorant, apathetic society. They all know what's going on with Britney Spears or who won the football game last night. But they can't even tell you about the instrument that's in their wallet that they base their entire life on. Think of that. And this process has all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and it does so in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Folks, I'm not a smart person at all. But what I am is I am a student. I do know how to read. I do know how to raise a red flag when I believe I'm being lied to, and I'm able to go and do the research. I have the desire to go and do the research. And this is the only means that we're going to turn this around. So let's put this whole quote together one more time. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens, that's you. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society than to debauch its currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction. And it does so in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. John Maynard Keynes, you will know it as Keynesian economics. So again, folks, what takes place with this insolvent corporation? Now, this insolvent corporation does have infrastructure, and because everything has been leaned, it has control of everything through the solvent corporation. Are you with me? Solvent corporation leans the insolvent corporation, putting itself in a superior position. And everything below that insolvent corporation is leaned to satisfy the bankruptcy. Now, we did read to you verbatim how the United States, the corporation formed in the Organic Act of 1871, went bankrupt on March 9th, 1933. It's acknowledged, it's in the congressional record, and the banking system, the law system, the education system, all have been acting upon it. So that's not up for debate. If you haven't seen them other shows, I invite you to view them. You can do them at www.katv.org. But I also invite you to do your own research. Read the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Read the Training with the Enemies Act of 1933, amended from the Training with the Enemies Act of 1917. Read all these House joint resolutions that plainly come out and say, yes, the United States government's a corporation and it's bankrupt. Read Congressman Jim Traficant, Louis T. McFadden, Lindbergh, and others, Ron Paul, who have all come out from this long time spectrum of time, have come out and told the American people that we are a bankrupt entity. Read how during the meeting at Jekyll Island, how the bankers that got together representing foreign banking houses and some domestic, how they created the 1913 Federal Reserve Act. Study and read how they put this into play on December 23rd, 1913, while the Congress was away for the Christmas holiday. Study all this. Read this. And I know last week we talked about some people getting angry. I had a friend of mine who sometimes watches the show. A lot of times he gets very, very angry. But I told him, anger is good. Anger is good. And the reason why anger is good is because it means you still care. So you can take this energy of anger and you can manifest this into movement. You can manifest this into educating your fellow citizens. And folks, start with your family. Start with your friends. Okay? Start and understand that there is a conspiracy that's operating behind the scenes, secretive and unobserved, as Mr. Keynes writes, controlling the mechanisms of our currency, controlling and debauching our society. Understand this. Understand why the rest of the world literally hates us. When I was in the Marine Corps, folks, I got to travel to quite a few countries. And some of them were in very bad, war-torn countries. Other ones were semi-prosperous, and others were just under the thumb of the United States. And I will tell you that there are some things that I learned from that experience. And one of them is that basically the people of each country, we don't have a problem with each other. And when I say the people, I'm talking about the average family guy or the guy who wants to go to the bar, watch a football game. The people. They don't really have a problem with each other because we all desire pretty much the same thing. We want to provide for ourselves. We want to provide for our families. We want people to be healthy. We want to have a stable and moral society. It's the power people, the power players, the governments, the bankers at the top of the triangle that create the conflict to control society. And I saw this a lot overseas. And in speaking with a lot of friendly people overseas, I came away with one understanding. And that was this. Well, actually, there was a couple of things. But one of them was that the average person overseas has more understanding of what's going on in America, both domestically and abroad, than the average American. And of course, I now understand why. The mechanisms of education, the mechanisms of the mainstream media, and so forth. The other thing I understood was that the reason why we were put in harm's way at different times was not for the same reasons as what was being sold to the American people. Cambodia and the Golden Triangle come to mind. So you've got to understand, folks, that this whole game is a game of deception. And it all starts with controlling the currency. Okay? So I want to read a couple more quotes here about this. And this is a letter from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson. Of all the perplexities, confusion, and distresses in America that arise, not from defects in the Constitution or the Confederation, nor from want of honor or virtue, as much from downright ignorance of the nature of coin, credit, and circulation. Isn't that something? So what John Adams is writing Thomas Jefferson about is that basically, folks, it's not that at that point, you're going to have a hard time running these congresswomen and congressmen through a sifter and coming up with a drop of honor now, because they're all bought and paid for subservience to the bankers that they know are destroying their country. They know this, folks. What was it Senator Baucus said? We went through this last week on the show. When Ron Paul was senior to be the chair of the Banking and Currency Committee, and the bankers appointed Baucus. And what did Baucus say? It was from the Birmingham News. He said that people in Washington believe that we are here to regulate the banks. I believe we are here to serve the banks. Quote unquote, Birmingham News, look it up. That was last week, folks. Things haven't changed since 1913, and they know it. The bank hath benefit of interest on all monies which it creates out of nothing. Now, who would make a comment like that? William Patterson, the founder of the Bank of England in 1694. Folks, 1694 they had this charade going on. The bank hath the benefit of interest on all monies, which it creates out of nothing. The money power denounces as public enemies all who question its methods and throw light upon its crimes. Just incredible. That was William Jennings Bryan. Whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all its industry and commerce. President James A. Garfield, who was assassinated by the bankers, the Federal Reserve Act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the President Wilson signs this bill, the invincible government of the monetary power will be legalized. Wow, what a statement. What a statement. Okay, now this is another statement that I want to read to you. And I want you to listen to the words from this, and I'm going to tell you who it is first. This is Sir Joseph Stump. He was a director of the Bank of England in 1940. Okay, 1940. And I want you to listen to his words here. Now, this was something that the powers to be were quite upset about this statement. He made this statement going public. Okay, but really pay attention to what the director of the Bank of England, the largest bank in the world, is telling you in 1940. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them with the power to create credit, and with the flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. If you want to be slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let the bankers control money and control the credit. Wow, that's incredible. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them with the power to create credit. And with a flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. Folks, he's speaking about the earth. If you want to be slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let the bankers control money and control credit. Unbelievable, okay? Banks lend by creating credit. They create the means of payment out of nothing. This is Ralph M. Haltrey, former Secretary of the Treasury of England. Let me just read that again to you. Banks lend by creating credit. They create the means of payment out of nothing. So, folks, they control the credit. They control the issuance of the currency, and then you have to pay them an interest because they gave you permission to create it to print it in the first place. Well, folks, I've obviously have not been able to get into everything that we wanted to get into, and so next show we'll continue along this theme. But real quick, here's what we're going to get into next week. We are going to get into the Infrastructure Privatization Act. And what that is, folks, is basically we're going to read to you verbatim by the authority vested in me as president, blah, 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 how and the mechanisms that they used to sell the infrastructure of the private corporation that I was just talking to you about. Okay? So please return next week. Sometimes there's so much information here that I'm not able to get to I got to lay a foundation to get to the points that we want to make. But next week, we are going to read to you verbatim, again, the Infrastructure Privatization Act, where the United States government is selling off infrastructure. Folks, I believe it's the state of Arizona 2 weeks ago sold their state capitol building and is now leasing it. I'm not making this up. If you go on the internet and punch in, I think it was CBS News, they actually carried this, which surprised me. But I guess, why keep the deception up anymore? The game's over. Folks, as always, very, very appreciative of you watching our program. I apologize to you for not getting into the final subject matter that we wanted to get into today. My apologies. But please return next week, and we will continue with our discussion and our demonstration that the insolvent corporation that you know is the United States government is not only privatized all of your infrastructure, but they are actually selling it off now to foreign investors. I know that sounds crazy. Come next week and we'll read it verbatim to you. As always, thank you very much for watching, and as always, we remind you that your government is your responsibility. Thank you for watching.